Okay, everybody, we're going to get things started. Happy Wednesday. My name is Aaron Magee. I'm the VP of North America here at Mo Engage, and we're going to talk today about what the great state of California has in store for us regarding CCPA. Marit Davey is going to be taking us through everything we need to know about CCPA, and I'm going to introduce her in a second, but just a little bit of housekeeping. Webinar today is going to run about 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A afterwards. Please submit your questions to the GoToWebinar portal. I'll be kind of keeping a monitor of those, and then we can ask those of Marit after she's done kind of going through the webinar. So Marit, I will let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you, Aaron. Hi, everyone. So based on the signups, it looks like we should have a good crowd here today. I'm glad to be here and share some practical knowledge on CCPA. Now, before we get started, a little bit about me and what I do. The meaning of data privacy is not always understood. So for instance, here is what my mom thinks I do. And here's what my friends think I do. But in reality, what I actually do, I represent CreditandPrivacyBar.io, and I'm a compliance professional with expertise in data privacy and consumer rights. I have built global scale privacy programs from the ground up, and my clients include top retailers with consumer footprints across the world. I would like to add a mini disclaimer here that I'm not your legal advisor. So if you need a legal opinion, that is something you'll need to take up with your private counsel. Now, back to Aaron for a brief overview on Mo Engage.
Yeah, thanks, Marit. So yeah, anybody on the webinar might be wondering, what does Mo Engage do and why are we talking about CCPA? Well, Mo Engage as a company really just helps consumer businesses, mostly marketers, understand their consumer behavior across all their different touch points. And then we give marketers the ability to send hyper-personalized communications across mobile, web, email, and SMS to drive better customer retention, lifetime value. So it's things like, reactivating dormant users, converting free users to paid, driving repeat purchases, upselling and cross-selling relevant products or services, and that kind of thing. So obviously CCPA is something that's near and dear to our heart because we're very data-driven and helping marketers, take that data and turn it ultimately into revenue. And just a little bit about us, we count McAfee, Ally Bank, and Hollywood Reporter as some of our customers. So Marit, with that, I will turn it back to you, and you can take us away and give us all the details around CCPA.
Great, thanks. So in today's webinar, we are going to talk about the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, and its background. Also applicability, and we will cover some terminology and comparison to GDPR. Then we'll review the data privacy landscape, consumer sentiment, consumer rights within CCPA, and finally, we will review CCPA's impact to businesses and key requirements for compliance. CCPA compliance deadline is January 1, 2020. This was unchanged by new 2020 ballot initiative, which leaves us only with 62 days remaining. So no pressure there, but let's move on to see how to get there. We all know that GDPR went into force last year, and as soon as most companies were done with that, the CCPA got passed. Unlike GDPR, that was created over a long period of time, over 10 years, by approximately 1,000 bureaucrats, CCPA came out of a dinner party. The story has been retold by many, but basically a Google engineer was taunting Alistair McTaggart, who is a real estate mogul, and bragging how much information Google had on him, and that there is really nothing he can do about it. Now, McTaggart started worrying about data privacy after talking to the engineer and decided to do something about it. Shortly thereafter, McTaggart got a consultant and spent nearly $3.5 million to place an initiative on California's November ballot last year, then negotiated a deal with state lawmakers instead, which resulted in that CCPA was signed into law in California on June 28, 2018. As you may expect, since it was passed swiftly, it has been criticized as poorly drafted and ambiguous, and with ambiguous and conflicting language, which is predicted to lead to litigation to resolve open issues. The CCPA becomes effective on January 1st, 2020. Now, after that date, Californians will be able to demand that companies disclose what personal data they have collected about them, and also ask companies to delete that data. The law will severely impact tech giants like Google and Facebook, but also retailers like Macy's and Walmart. The enforcement date is July 2020, but it comes with, since the law comes with 12-month look back for some consumer right request, that basically means that the data you're collecting today is already a subject to CCPA. Once it takes effect, consumers will have the right to request your business disclose all specific pieces of information pertaining to them for the past 12 months. That means it goes back as early as January 1st this year. Your business will have to disclose whether consumers' personal data was released or sold to a third party. CCPA also intends to give consumers more control over the data through notice and choice before you collect their data, enabling consumers to tell us what to do with it. The California Consumer Privacy Act is a bill meant to enhance privacy rights and consumer protection for residents of California. So in a nutshell, the main purpose is to provide consumers the right to know what information companies have on them, the right to say no, and the right to have the information kept safe. California's new privacy law is the most expansive state privacy law in US history, imposing GDPR-like transparency and individual rights requirements on companies. The law will impact nearly every entity that handles personal information regarding California residents. The CCPA does not, though, distinguish between online and brick-and-mortar companies. And this means that even if your business has no physical footprint or staff in the state of California, could still be considered a business in California. Therefore, you will have legal responsibilities under the CCPA. So physical business presence in California isn't necessarily mandatory for the law to apply. Service providers that handle personal information on behalf of business and other third parties that receive personal information will also be impacted here. And as currently written, however, the CCPA does not apply to nonprofit organizations. Now here is a litmus test. Your company is CCPA applicable if it does business in California and meets one or more of the CCPA threshold requirements. It has yearly revenue of more than 25 million, either annually sells, buys, or shares personal data of at least 50,000 consumers, devices, or households, or it generates at least 50% of its yearly revenue from selling consumers' personal information. This is targeted mainly to ad tech companies. Regulators do not really care about advertisers, but it's not necessarily the death of advertising in US either. So moving on, what is personal information under the CCPA? According to the CCPA, personal information broadly includes any information which relates to, identifies, describes, can be associated with, or can reasonably be linked with, directly or indirectly, a specific consumer or household. To simplify this for you, this information can be a name, unique personal identifier, postal address, online identifier, email address, internet protocol address, account name, driver's license number, social security number, passport number, certain education information, and biometric information, among others. And crucially for marketers, it includes behavior data derived from digital interactions between a brand and consumers, and any influences your company draws from such data, like a consumer's buyer's persona or preferences. Here, you should really rethink your personalization strategy. Also, I want to stress that you can only know and understand your risk under this law if you fully understand the scale of personal information that you collect. Equipped with this valuable knowledge, you'll be able to reduce risk while proving your compliance to regulators. So what is selling? Selling is a critical question that you need to, this is a critical question you need to consider while assessing your CCPA risk. Please note that under CCPA, the word selling encompasses or covers any exchange of consumers' personal data for either monetary or other valuable consideration. However, we know that the phrase other valuable consideration does leave some room for interpretation. For example, if your business discloses or transfers personal information to any third party under an agreement, it may be considered a sale. The vendor may sell the information without your company itself deriving any benefit from such sale. It is also clear that no money has to change hands in order for personal information to be sold. That being said, what that may mean is yet to be seen, and as a result, your business should ideally prepare for compliance with a broader definition in mind. So this slide is about comparison of key GDPR and CCPA requirements. I have this traffic light signal here to indicate whether there was increase in the law or if it's similar, or if there was decline in certain sense. So the CCPA is the beginning of America's GDPR. Similar to the GDPR, the CCPA will require organizations to focus on user data and provide transparency in how they're collecting, sharing, and using such data. But so to what extent can a company extend its GDPR capabilities if they had processes for GDPR already in place? Certain CCPA requirements overlap with existing GDPR individual rights requirements, which may give GDPR-ready organizations a jumpstart on building a capability around user data handling practices, but still several policies, processes, and systems will still need updating to address the differences between those two laws. So looking at the global perspective, there are differences how how privacy is viewed. In Europe, privacy is considered more of a human right, and in US, it's considered a commercial right. This table here has been divided by different types of requirements. So scope in EU, the scope is basically personal data that is being processed, versus within CCPA, it's personal data that is collected. For rights, you can see that those that already had a process in place for erasure, also known as deletion request, can utilize a similar process for CCPA. But for instance, the right to access or right to know within CCPA, there need to be modifications put in place, since there is a 12-month look back for CCPA versus GDPR didn't have that. And the legal basis, which indicates the right to equal services and pay, GDPR does not implicitly comment on it and won't penalize it. Whereas CCPA actually goes a step further and prohibits not only denying or offering different levels of quality to consumers, but even for suggesting it. For instance, getting consumers to sign up for a loyalty card or a specific discount or coupon, getting paid in a sense, or getting a better quality of treatment by giving access to your personal information, and that is not tolerated under CCPA. And the difference is in enforcement. So even though it appears that the private right of action penalties are less within CCPA, keep in mind that, for instance, in a case of class action suit, this penalty could actually expand exponentially. And for regulatory enforcement, CCPA has a 7,500 penalty per violation, yet there is no ceiling to that. Moving on to data privacy in the news. Here are some big headlines that describe the heightened consumer awareness and interest in the right to privacy. As we all have noticed probably, today the focus is more on data scaring us, whereas only a couple of years ago, the data-related news were typically considered exciting or fantastic. Headlines today are heavily focused on data breaches, lapses in privacy compliance, and extremely high penalties, increasing from millions to billions. Also, more laws are expected to come up, so there is certainly a sense of rise in privacy regimes globally. Now, what is the consumer view on privacy? Here's what PwC found when they surveyed 2,000 US consumers over age of 18 in 2017. They found that 10% of consumers feel they have complete control over their personal information. That is extremely low. And they also found that 25%, which is 1/4, of consumers believe most companies handle their sensitive data responsibly. Now, 88% of consumers say their willingness to share data depends on how much they trust the company. And trust is really a critical piece. Damaging PR could easily end up being much more costly than the fines I just mentioned. Nearly the same amount of consumers say they'll take business elsewhere if they don't trust the company. And more than half of consumers said they'll make an effort to get their information back from a company if they had that choice. Consumers demand more privacy, and CCPA will certainly provide more choice to them than they ever had before. So this slide is about more specifically about the consumer's rights. At large, the CCPA will allow consumers to force companies to tell them what personal information they have collected. It also lets consumers force companies to delete that data or to forbid them from sharing it with third parties. Meanwhile, companies will have to do more to tell consumers upfront about what data they collect. Now, what are the basic consumer rights? So there is right to know, right to say no, right to delete, right to be informed, mandated opt-in for minors, and private right of action. Ultimately, an organization has to be able to respond to consumer requests, any of those above. In practice, this means consumers will be able to ask anyone from Google to Starbucks to disclose that what data they are collecting simply by using website or phone number, whichever means. There has to be at least two options how consumer can place their request. Those companies will also have to put "Do not sell my personal information" button on their website and delete that data if a consumer asks them to do so. It is important to know that a business won't be able to refuse services or charge higher prices if a consumer exercises these rights. Now, Alistair McTaggart, his current view is that the CCPA is a great baseline, but that additional privacy rights and protections are now needed for combat evolving technological tools increasingly exploiting consumers' data. So there's certainly more to come. What are the steps and risks when responding to consumers' requests? Companies need an easy way to receive, log, and verify the DSR, which stands for the Data Subject Access Request, access right request, and to automatically notify the person and company leads. The risks here are that without automation, requests could be missed. And without verifying, you can't really trust that the requester is who they say they are. Now, the step 2 to consider here is that a company needs to assign and manage the collection or deletion of information, usually from multiple data stores, with multiple owners or managers. The risks here are that requests need to be managed to ensure deadlines are met. And also systems that manage DSR should keep the personal information centralized and encrypted. Step 3, company needs to review the request and the personal information to ensure that you're delivering information to the right person. Approvals must be tracked and they need to be auditable. And the big risk here is really that if it was delivered to the wrong person, there is risk of exposing consumers' privacy. And lastly, a company needs to deliver the information not only to the right person, but in a secure way. So again, the systems that manage DSR should be keeping the personal information centralized and encrypted. If you don't know where to begin yet, I have listed here 5 key CCPA requirements that may have the biggest impact on your business as you're preparing for compliance. I listed here data mapping as number 1. Even though it's not required under CCPA, this is truly the most essential component. Frankly put, you would not be able to fulfill consumers' requests accurately without going through this exercise. Additionally, if a regulator were to come to check on your compliance, you would not be able to prove it, prove your compliance without proper data mapping. Second, identify what data elements you're collecting and evaluate if it's necessary to do business. And that falls under the data mapping as well. And always follow the principle, if you don't need certain information, don't collect it. You may actually remove something out of scope by doing that. So next requirement here, obligation to fulfill access and deletion requests, and also obligation, third one, obligation to fulfill opt-out requests. So simply you need to have processes in place to fulfill those requests. And updating your agreements, updating service level agreements with third-party data processors, and also finally remediation of information security gaps and system vulnerabilities. So these are the top requirements that should take most of your attention, but there are others, so this is not limited to this. What are your next steps towards compliance? I think it's worth mentioning that many of the provisions in the CCPA include complying with your consumers' request for their personal information. On the other hand, some provisions require your business to retain customers' data you collect in specific instances. At large, your business must clearly disclose to requesting consumer the categories as well as specific pieces of personal information you have collected. Your business must also, before or at the point of data collection, should inform consumers about the specific types of personal data to be collected, as well as the purposes for which the types of personal information will be used. And your company should disclose and deliver personal information free of charge as requested by your consumer. However, keep in mind that your business is not under an obligation to furnish personal data to consumer more than 2 times in a 12-month period. You should also re-identify or else link any information that in the usual course of business isn't maintained in a way that would be deemed personal information. And final thoughts here. So meeting subject access requests, whether GDPR, CCPA, or another regulation, can be difficult to achieve. So you need to be able to identify content related to data subject, classify and protect consumer data, and also delete it upon request. You would need to update privacy notices, policies, procedures, and of course your website. Certainly advise to work with someone who is knowledgeable about the law in order to determine how your business, your clients, vendors, and other third parties are defined under the CCPA, and then concentrate on specific implications for your business. And don't expect this to be the last Privacy Act, and be agile and ready to modify your company's approach as a result of potential amendments to the law, as well as the Attorney General's forthcoming regulations. Consider hiring more people, as the amount of requests is unpredictable, so you need to be ready for more requests potentially. And just overall being prepared, it will save your company a lot of headaches and possibly costly enforcement actions in the future. But again, start with that data mapping. And here's my closing thought before we move on to Q&A session. And thank you, and to you, Erin.
Yeah, no,
Any
very timely.
questions?
Very timely. My kids are asking me like, "Oh, it's Christmas. Or not Christmas, sorry. It's Halloween Eve." I was like, "Geez, give us a day. Give us a day." So yeah, thank you. Well, yeah,
Sure.
thanks. So I'm going to wait for some questions to roll in, and while we're doing that, I'm going to launch a quick poll, and we'll leave that up while people type in their questions. One of the ones that was pretty present for me in this whole thing. I mean, if I'm in charge of compliance for my company, or I'm in a legal team, and my boss, CEO, CFO, whatever, comes to me and says, "Hey, what do I need to know about the CCPA thing? Am I going to get fired if we do something wrong?" I mean, what do you tell them?
So if they do something wrong,
Well, I'm just saying, like, I've heard like in the past, I've had CMOs or VPs of IT come to me and say, "Hey, this GDPR thing, like, if I don't follow the rules, like, I mean, basically, am I going to go to jail?" I mean, is that something that is it that extreme at this point with CCPA, or is it pretty much just a slap on the wrist and a fine if you don't do all the things you're supposed to do?
so far it's limited to fines. GDPR though goes a step further and has involved executives actually. They some of them had to go behind bars for certain violations, but currently that's not the case within CCPA.
Okay. Got it. Well, we have somebody here who raised their hand, wants to ask a question. So, Sandra, I'm going to unmute you, and you can jump on the audio and ask the question live.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So under the requirement to disclose information that we collect and our store, we don't sell it all, so we're exempt from that. When a consumer contacts us, and I'm going to use myself as an example, we have verified who they are, that they are a California resident, and they want to know what information we collect. Do we just say we collect your name, your social, your date of birth, your address, blah, blah, blah? Or do we have to say we collect that you are Sandra Chastain and that you live at 123 Main Street and that your social is 123456789, etc.?
So thank you, Sandra, for the question. So basically, the requirement is that identifiers don't need to be provided twice, yet if they're used for different purposes or for different systems, they do need to be provided separately. And even though it's not requirement, that general attorney advises to provide information per category. So basically, you would look at your systems and your vendors and split them up by categories of type of information used and for what purposes, and then ideally provide it in that fashion. So if name was collected as a part of contact information, but also as a unique identifier, then it would be the idea is that you provide it in both cases.
So we don't actually have to say, Sandra Chastain, we show your address on file as 123 Main Street. We just say, Sandra Chastain, we've collected your address, your phone number, your date of birth.
So when it comes to specific right to know about specific detail of information for that consumer, then you indeed need to provide the actual information on file for them in detail. Now, you may consider masking certain information or truncating some of it, depending on what information you have on them, just for security purposes. But when it's not a general information request, but it's a right to know, you indeed have to provide all information in a clear format where it's understandable to them. For instance, if you have coding, they may not understand what it stands for.
Right.
So it has to be clear and concise.
So what about where it conflicts with PCI requirements, GLBA, and other privacy regulations?
There are some exceptions. I would say that those you would need to speak with your private counsel about, but there are some exceptions in which instance, especially when it comes to deletion requests, that you may be able to keep certain information instead of deleting it, but you would also need to disclose that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, another question for you, Marit, is, in California, is it the consumers in California, or, ultimately, I mean, I guess who needs to worry about CCPA? I mean, if somebody is, let's say, based in the UK and doing business here in the US and has consumers in California, do they fall under this, or is it just companies based? I mean, can you give us a little bit of clarity of what geography and stuff has to do with this whole equation?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So as mentioned earlier, physical presence in California is not necessarily required.
Okay.
Consumer is defined as California resident, and then business, we went over how business is defined, but basically, you would need to consider, it most likely applies to you if you have a headquarters in California, or if you have employees in California, or if you are an entity incorporated in California, even as foreign entity, or you have ties to the state, including in some cases repeated sales into the state of ownership of real property in the state.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What you mentioned before, kind of the whole right to know, right to be informed. Can you tell us what the difference is between those two things?
Mm-hmm. So right to be informed relates more to like notices either at the point of sale, in your privacy policy, and it's a general information about what type of information the company is collecting, sharing, selling, and for what purposes, versus right to know. Sorry, I don't know if I mentioned, but the previous was about right to be informed, and then right to know is actually Sandra sort of asked a question about that same topic as well, but right to know is about specific information about the consumer that the company has in file for them.
Got it. Okay.
In any of the systems, external or internal.
Yeah, super. Okay, well, no, that's helpful. Thank you. Is there anybody else? I've seen a few questions come in on the chat window. Is there anybody else who has a question? They can either type it into the question window, or they can click the little raise your hand button in the webinar console, and I can unmute you. Anybody else? Oh, here we go. So we got a question here. How should notices be written and presented in emails sent? So basically, would it require special CCPA opt-out in addition to the standard opt-out option? Especially, this is specifically around emails, I think, that are sent out.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, basically, how should notices be written and presented in emails that are sent out? So would it, do emails right now, right? There's kind of a lot of times there's a standard kind of can spam opt-out option. Would they also require a special CCPA opt-out in addition to the standard can spam opt-out?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a specific answer for this.
Okay.
What I understand is that the notice can go out that your privacy policy has been updated. But again, I would say to consult with your counsel on that one.
Okay. No, that's helpful. Thanks. Anyone else with questions? Otherwise, we'll let people get back and, get that second cup of coffee. Doesn't look like it. Okay. Well, hey, everybody, thank you very much. Marit, thank you.
Thank you, Mo.
Very informative.
Thank you, Mo. Engaged. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, and we'll talk to you all next time. Take care.